Welcome to Legal Beagle.
Hello and welcome to Legal Beagle with attorney Kristina Lyke, founder of Lyke Law PLLC. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Search, Seizure, and Saying No, what you need to know when stopped by police. Great to see you again, Kristina.
Great to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Excited to get into this.
Absolutely.
So before we start today, is there any new legislation coming down that the audience may feel is helpful to know about?
That's a great question. Actually, there's what is called Senate Bill 111. And what that is actually kind of like a PPO for vulnerable elderly individuals. So, our individuals that are elderly out there, there's a lot of financial abuse that's taken over on them. So, the Senate bill, if you look at it on its face, it's actually it looks like it's a very good bill. The problem is that, in my opinion, it's not, because what it does is it takes away the Second Amendment of individuals. And what it also does is, it takes it so that it's reasonable cause instead of imminent harm. Like if there's going to be irreparable harm happening to an individual for a PPO. So it's completely different. So reasonable cause is it's a little burden. It's not much at all. What it does is it infringes on individuals. So it could take a driver's vehicle, or not, excuse me, a gun away. It also could take a grandson's gun away, a granddaughter's gun away, someone outside, like a neighbor. And that's just with this vulnerable PPO. So I really do have some concerns about that. And this is it's not coming into effect yet. It's with the Senate. I believe it did pass with the Senate. I know it passed through the committee, but this really infringes upon constitutional rights, and criminal defense attorneys need to be aware of this, and so do individuals, because this affects everybody's rights. And reasonable cause is, again, such a low burden to have, and that it takes away just your Second Amendment, your Fourth Amendment, your 14th Amendment. So there's a lot of concerns here.
Interesting. Well, thanks for that update. We'll have to keep our eye on that one as it kind of goes through. So let's start talking about some searches and seizures. Obviously these are terms we hear a lot in Law and Order and movies and whatnot, but what does it really mean and why is it important?
Well, the Fourth Amendment is very important because it actually protects us from the right to unreasonable search and seizure. So if you remember, we always believe our house is a castle, and we want to make sure we protect that. So the Fourth Amendment actually gives us the right to privacy. It makes sure that we don't have people coming in with an unreasonable search. It also protects us just from not being a communist country as well. And that's a very important a constitutional amendment, and we need to make sure that we protect that. And it's kind of going on a sliding scale.
So if you're stopped by a police officer and you're in a vehicle and the police officer asks to search your vehicle, what do you say?
Well, first of all, I'd like to give a couple hints here for individuals. When they get stopped by a police officer, make sure that you pull over your car and make sure it's not into a busy intersection, because we want to make sure that the police are safe as well. However, I want to remind individuals that it's a reasonable suspicion that the police have to have. And what does that mean? That means it could be a taillight being broken. It could also mean that you're speeding. It could also mean that you ran a red light. So it has to be a reasonable suspicion, and it has to be specific facts. And we want to make sure that people understand that. But also, I want to give a couple other more hints here, is that after you pull over, make sure you put your hands on the steering wheel and not have your hands jittery or into the car or anything of that nature, because when the police officer approaches, they may think that you're trying to look for a gun or trying to hide something. So just place your hands on the steering wheel, especially if you have a CPL, which is a concealed pistol license. My understanding is that they don't have you do that anymore, but my recommendation is always do that, because that way you place the police officer in safety, but you also place yourself in safety as well. And then get your driver's license out and your proof of insurance and give that to them as well. I would also suggest that when they ask you to go and search your vehicle, that you just politely say no. Now, if they ask you questions, like the police officers try to ask you questions, they'll say, "Where'd you go tonight? Where are you coming from?" You can politely state, I'd like to have my attorney and I'm not going to answer any questions right now. Just be polite about it. You don't have to be all aggressive. That doesn't help matters, because one thing is when you do get pulled over by the police, usually people are pretty nervous.
Yeah. So basically just politely say no, and the only way that they can really force it is if they have, again, a good reason for doing so, correct?
Right. Well, as to the search, if they saw something in plain view, like if
Mhm.
they saw like a crack pipe that was right next to you, or they saw some cocaine
How
on
did that get there?
right, exactly, or some some powder on your nose, and
Sure.
maybe the pipe was over here. Sometimes you could have a gun. I mean, I remember this one case that I had, and people don't realize this, but the reason why I say don't have them search your vehicle, say no to the consent part, because this is what happened. We had a gun in a car that belonged to one of my past clients, and what happened was is he got charged for having that gun. It wasn't his gun, but yet we had to go and have a trial on that. Luckily, he was found, not guilty. But the thing of it is, we want to make sure that people realize that you never know who's going to be in your vehicle. Sometimes people could put something in there that you might have some enemies, or maybe you brought a friend and you didn't think that that friend actually had a cocaine problem or something of that nature. And we just want to make sure that people understand that it's not that we don't that we're trying to be offensive to the police officers. We're making sure that we protect our rights.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you could have somebody in your car and something falls out of their pocket. With
Absolutely.
drugs or something like that. It has nothing to do with you. You didn't know it was even there, and they could find it. So yeah, that's a good point. Definitely a good point. So now let's talk about the home, the castle, as we said. If the police come to your house and knock at your door and ask if they can enter, what do you say? What if they want to come into your home and search? What do you say?
Well, you have rights. And like I said, your house is your kingdom. And I always say this actually when I come home, my house is my kingdom. And I
Hmm.
want to make sure that, if I don't want to talk to somebody, I don't have to. And I do a lot of work at home usually, but what I will say is this is that if you start swearing at me on the phone, I'm going to hang up, because that's my time, my castle. That's my, sanctity, right?
Hmm.
So the rights that you have is this is that you don't have to answer the door. And a lot of people think that they have to answer the door because they're the police officers. No, you can just peek out the window and see that they're there and not answer it. Now, I will also say this: if you do want to talk to the police officers, and I would recommend, if you actually think that you did something wrong, don't go outside the door. But if you want to talk to the police officers, I would suggest that you go out the front door, keep the door closed so that they can't go inside your house or see anything out there, because if it's in plain view, they can go in and confiscate that, or they think that maybe you gave them consent to go in your house. Now, the only way that you would have them to go in your house is if there is a warrant. So I would ask them on the porch, do you have a warrant to come into the house? And if they say yes, then say, may I please see that warrant? And then look to see if it's valid. Is there a judge's signature on it? What rooms are they actually searching? Are they searching the whole entire house? What are they looking for? And if they have a valid warrant, obviously you have to let them in the house. Otherwise, if you try to obscure anything or try to, slap it in their face and not go and do what they ask, you could be charged with an RNO, resisting and obstructing too, as well.
Hmm.
So we don't want that to happen.
No, definitely don't want that. What happens if it's somebody else who calls the cops? If it's a neighbor or somebody who calls the police, and does that change anything?
That's a great question, because a lot of police reports start off with, it was a neighbor, it was a domestic violence situation. They might say, I heard some screaming from the house down the road, and there was some things that were being thrown. At least that's what it sounded like to me. So what they'll do is the police will come out and check, and you don't have to answer the door. You can actually just talk through the door. But if you want, again, but in that kind of circumstance, I would suggest and recommend that you actually stay in the house, because that's when we sometimes get into detainment, and they can talk to you and ask you questions. And you would rather have your attorney present when you're being detained or trying to have questions asked.
So, what is the difference between detainment and an actual arrest?
Well, detainment is completely different than being arrest. So arrest is actually being in custody and you're going to go to jail right then and there. And you have to have the burden is probable cause. So detainment is where a lot of individuals get in trouble. And what I mean by that is the police officers can detain you for a while for their own protection. They can detain you for a couple hours, but it has to be a reasonable time period. So you can't go and detain somebody for more than, if you did it for 24 hours, that would be a custodial situation. And then anything that they said during that time period, you could actually go, we call it sometimes fruit of the poisonous tree, or we do a motion to get rid of those statements because of the fact they're stating things in a custodial situation and they didn't have the Miranda rights. And you have to have those Miranda rights, which are very important. So you know that you have the right to remain silent because that's your Fifth Amendment right. And you have that right, just like you have a right to have an attorney too as well, which is your Sixth Amendment. And I also would like to add this is that when you're in a custodial situation or in detainment, please be quiet because they can actually go and put you in handcuffs and being detained for a reasonable time period. And they call that detainment. It's not a custodial situation. And it all depends, and every case is different. You have to look at the circumstances, the facts surrounding it. So the totality of the circumstances we look at and see what specific facts there are. And then in the custodial situation, I want to remind people that when you go to jail, make sure you contact a family member to try to make sure that you get an attorney. But do not repeat anything about what the police said or what about the offense or anything about the alleged incident, because what you want to do is make sure you have an attorney there present for the arraignment because you're to be arraigned within 72 hours. And that's during the time period that you're actually in a custodial situation, you're in jail. So when you go to arraignment, normally what happens is that we have a public defender there if you don't have a retained attorney, and the public defender will help you out and guide you through that. But what it is that you're pleading not guilty. I always say plead not guilty there, and don't say anything else except for when the magistrate or the judge asks you, what's your name, what's your address, what's your phone number, and they may ask you, where do you work, how long you've lived in the community, like how long have you lived in the residence, because those all go to your bond. And then normally with bond conditions, there's differences between a personal recognizance bond or a cash surety bond. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that you need to follow those bond restrictions. There's bond guidelines, and they're not just guidelines, they're actually ones that you need to follow because you can't leave the state of Michigan while you're on bond. Normally, they say that you can't drink alcohol, you can't go to bars, you can't smoke marijuana, even though Michigan allows you to, right? But you can't smoke marijuana on bond. You cannot do illegal, take part in illegal drugs, anything of that nature. And you cannot be around the alleged victim either. And
Mhm.
sometimes they'll even put some other things in there too as well, like drug testing, maybe twice a week. But it's very important that you follow those bond conditions and then bring those to your attorney when you do finally meet with your attorney.
Okay, that's a lot of good tips here. Just in general for the police coming to your house and pulling you over in your car. When it comes to detainment and actually being arrested, what are some of the most common mistakes you see? Because obviously, people, it's an emotion. It's like maybe you're scared, you're emotional, you're not sure what's going on, so you may do things that you shouldn't. What other things would you advise people, in your experience that you've seen, like, hey, make sure you don't do this or make sure you do this?
You know, I have seen a lot throughout the years. This is my 19th year of practicing, so I have 18 years behind my belt there. But I will say this: a lot of times I get the videos, right, and the videos. I don't think I can be surprised anymore, but a lot of times people are so nervous, they just start talking to the police officer saying, you know what, I'm really a good guy, or I'm really a good girl. I just didn't mean to slap up my girlfriend or slap up my boyfriend, but he had it coming, she had it coming. And I'm thinking, oh no, that's right there at assault. Then they say, yeah, I did find the gun and I did hold the scissors up to my neck and I was going to go after her on that aspect, but I decided not to. And then, yes, I did take the phone away from her. And, the person's just getting deeper and deeper and
Mhm.
deeper. And all of a sudden you have kidnapping charges, you have, just all these different charges. And then at the end, you're thinking to yourself, now, why didn't they just be quiet? Right. And a lot of times, though, people just don't realize what they're doing because it's
Yeah.
anxiety. And, they're not getting maybe enough air to their brain waves there. But when you're in the back of a patrol car and the police are there, you feel like, "Ah, I don't have any control over the situation. Let me just try to talk to them. Maybe I can talk my way out." You're not going to talk your way out. You're going to talk your way into actually getting more charges. And sometimes, you get really great police officers that, say, oh, this guy is actually a pretty good guy, good person, or a good gal. And, they try to, stop them from talking. Sometimes I've seen that, but
Really? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sometimes they'll stop them for a second, but or they won't charge them for everything that they think they should be charged for. Because I see in police reports, like, they could be charged for a lot more, and, that to me shows that they're being respectful to the police officers, but I wish they would have just be quiet, just shut up and remain silent because they wouldn't have been in the situation in the first place, but, and we have to deal with the circumstances we have, but, I do sometimes thank the police officers for being kind to my clients because they don't always have to be that way. Because sometimes, people can be jerky when
Yeah.
they're being arrested. They're either maybe high on something, or you never know, or they're emotionally just crying because of the fact they're going through a breakup. And it's just nice to see that there is compassion out there.
Yeah.
And not everybody has that. So, especially on the roadside, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. Yeah, it's funny how it's like a psychological thing when people start talking, they just don't stop talking. I mean, it just happens when people you see people like get nervous and they just keep going and going and going, even just normal everyday situations. And I suppose it's probably the same psychological thing in those situations. They're nervous, so they just keep talking. They don't even know what they're saying anymore.
I know. I remember my first year of practicing, and I thought, well, if I keep talking, the judge is going to give me what I want.
Didn't work for your parents, doesn't work for the judges. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Legal Beagle with attorney Kristina Lyke. To connect with Kristina, head to likelaw.com. That's Lyke. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much, Kristina. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.